Ryoma Sukuna is an antagonist that has a surprising amount of depth, yet very little is actually talked about when discussing Ryoma Sukuna and his effect on the narrative and wider expanse of JJK, how he ties into certain other characters' narratives, and why he's just such a compelling antagonist. So in this video, I want to kind of discuss Ryoma Sukuna, bring him more to the forefront of discussion in terms of his character and his actual impact on the narrative, because I think this branding of Ryoma Sukuna being this kind of blank slate, typical, generic antagonist isn't actually all that true, and he does have a surprising amount of depth. And to kind of push this idea forward, I've come across a narrative analysis on Reddit, a pretty short one, but still one that was very interesting that I thought I would share. So full credits will be in the description. I'll link the original post and make sure you go support it because it's actually very well typed out and it's very interesting to read. I'm gonna read it out to you now. Sukuna, character analysis. Hell is what you make of it. In most ways, Sukuna is incredibly selfish. He knows what he likes, people suffering, fighting strong opponents, discovering new techniques, etc., etc. And he pursues those hobbies at the cost of other people's lives. The weird part, however, is that Sukuna is also very selfless. He can see the bigger picture, despite constantly indulging in moment-to-moment pleasures, torturing Yuji, playing a game with Jogo for no reason. Such examples like this. And for a guy who likes living so much, he isn't afraid to sacrifice his own life if it means the other parts of his soul can go on to live theirs. Because Sukuna seems ambivalent at worst about the loss of a finger or two, and only because doing so would cost him power. He does not care at all that a part of himself, maybe even the part that has incarnated and is thinking that it would be fine to lose a finger, will be lost to death. And that's an important distinction. Power is power, but his soul is consciousness, the very essence of who he is, and he has no qualms about sacrificing either for his ultimate goal. But why? Well, for one, there is no hell in JJK. All humans pass on to the same place, and Toji did not seem particularly hesitant to die again. So it's safe to say that eternal torture is not an aspect of the JJK afterlife. Also, incarnated sorcerers are basically dead for hundreds of years while in cursed object form, and they don't seem particularly changed either. It's very likely that death is simply where souls find peace. Vengeful spirits are basically sorcerers that are too angry to die, and incarnated sorcerers are basically sorcerers that were too regretful to die. So it makes sense that human death is a timeless realm devoid of cursed energy. Bear with me. Curses can't go there. Sorcerers with cursed energy can choose not to go there by becoming a vengeful spirit. Sorcerers that are essentially exercised with cursed tools / energy do not have a choice, and sorcerers within death can't reincarnate via their own power. Essentially, negative emotions and, by extension, cursed energy have no place in death. Therefore, the only hell is the one you create for yourself. Because I did not mean that it's impossible to feel regretful or angry in death, simply that you've reached the end of your story and is now powerless to change how you feel. Panda's siblings did not want to die, not because being dead itself is bad, but because being dead means that they will be left behind. It means that Gorilla will never get to buy his brother a ball. Yuji seems to understand this. For him, a good death is one with no regrets, when you're surrounded by family and comforted by the memories of a well-lived life. Sukuna understands this too, but unlike Yuji, he is not concerned with dying. He doesn't want to die, but he wouldn't mind it either. Instead, what he really wants is to live. This is also why he isn't concerned about losing a finger or two. Power for him makes living fun, but power is not his ultimate goal. It is a means to an end. What he really wants, what anybody really wants, is to be happy. And I think that's what makes him such a compelling antagonist. So, this was pretty short, and I'll give my thoughts on this kind of narrative analysis right now. And I completely agree with it. Ryoma Sukuna has some hidden depth to him in the way he acts. He might seem like this generic, ooga booga, I'm gonna kill you because I find it really fun antagonist, but that's not really what he is on the inside, I should say. Externally, he may appear that way, but internally, he has much more character to him. So, for instance, we have this in the very recent leaks, and I talked about this in my last video. He's referred to as a fallen angel by the angel Hana Kurusu, and she refers to her ideals as God, and naturally angels being subservient to God, or they're kind of God's I want to say enforcers, but that's not really a correct term. They're kind of his workforce, we'll say. You know, his agents, you should say. So when Sukuna is described as a fallen angel by Hana, it kind of implies that maybe he once had these ideals too, but he turned away from them in pursuit of something else. Lucifer is often known as a fallen angel because he turned away from God. He rebelled against God in some depictions. So perhaps then that Sukuna also has this rebellion against those ideals that the angel has of destroying all incarnated sorcerers because they destroy the mind of the people they're in. Maybe Sukuna once tried this method as well, but turned away from it, and in his pursuit of power, maybe he fell into power, or maybe he realized that there was a certain kind of meaning in turning away from it. There's a lot of speculation on that front, which may get fleshed out in future JJK, but turning back to current things that we know, Ryoma Sukuna isn't this blockhead, one-dimensional character as he might seem. He's implied a few times that he's actually begun to take very great interest in Yuji, for example. He's disappointed when Choso beats Yuji because he expects things from Yuji. He has certain expectations when originally he just wanted to kill Yuji and take his body. It seems like he's developing these attachments as his soul imprints onto Yuji. I feel like Yuji's soul is also imprinting onto him, and perhaps his mentality is also changing as he evolves with Yuji. So there's a certain kind of dynamic there of his character growth, going from this kind of blood-crazed entity from when he first arrived in chapter 1 to a much more calm and more playful, I would say, Sukuna in his later chapters, like around 116. We don't see much of Sukuna throughout the story because he's fairly in the background. He's a constant looming threat that hangs over the Jujutsu Kaisen verse, and that's what makes him a very good antagonist. He's never apparent in every scene, but he's always there. The reader always knows that Ryoma Sukuna is there, and he's impacting the story at every point, even when he's not there. He's constantly changing how events flow just by existing. Like in the recent chapter, when the entire Culling Games is now completely shifting to Yuji and to Sukuna simply because Sukuna exists. Like, simply just by being there, he's able to have this massive impact on the narrative. But as a character, Sukuna himself has certain ideals. He's supposed to represent the ultimate end goal of a sorcerer, which is this selfish state of pure lust, I would say. Not in the sense of like sexual lust, but in the sense of lust for strength, or to become the strongest. Sukuna, he's supposed to represent selfishness, and that's in contrast to Gojo's selflessness. So Gojo is supposed to represent what it means to be the height of a selfless sorcerer, someone who is willing to give up everything to protect other people, in the same way Yuta is, in the same way like Yuji is. Although Gojo still has certain selfish actions, he's still selfless enough to even kill his best friend for what he thinks is going to be like the greater good. And he's constantly, he won't sacrifice what he doesn't need to. This is portrayed pretty accurately in the Shibuya incident, but right before he gets sealed. That's why they use all the humans to barricade him down, block him down. It's because he doesn't want to kill those humans. He can't bring himself to do that, whereas we know, I think everyone would agree that Sukuna would do it in a heartbeat. He'd flick his fingers, open a domain expansion. He doesn't care, but Gojo does care, and that's the contrast between these two people. Gojo is supposed to represent a sorcerer that cares, while Sukuna has no attachment, even telling other people how to reach his own level or the level of people like Gojo. When he talks to Jogo, talks about how to reach the levels of Gojo, you need to burn away your desires and you need to destroy everything. because Sukuna has no attachment to anything, even to the people that helped him. He doesn't seem to have an attachment. Jogo brings him 10 fingers, and he kills Jogo. He just kills him. He's like, I'll help you, but first we're gonna play a game. He only lives for his own like entertainment, and that's stated in the Mahito fight as well, that only his pleasure and displeasure exist. It's only things that he likes and dislikes, that's all he exists for. And that ties into this character analysis from this Reddit user, that he just wants to be happy. He only seeks happiness, and it doesn't matter if he's the strongest. And I think that's precisely why he is, at least, you know, in my view, and a lot of others, that he is the strongest is because he doesn't care about being the strongest. Whereas you see a lot of these other characters, like, let's say Gojo, he kind of needs himself to be the strongest so he can look after other people. He, like, Suguru Geto, when he talks to Gojo, he's like, are you the strongest because you're Satoru Gojo? Or are you Satoru Gojo because you're the strongest? Constantly asking these questions. Other characters refer to Gojo as the strongest. They're always talking about Gojo being the strongest. But Sukuna never really refers to himself as just the pinnacle. Other people just put this title onto him, and he doesn't care about having that title. He never really cares about being like the peak of the golden age. He just wants to fight. He just wants to see battle. He just wants to have fun. And I think that's why he fights Jogo, is because he just wants to be entertained. He wants to resurrect himself with the 10 shadows, or at least in theory he does. He wants to have this interesting life, or this happiness, like this character analysis describes. And I think that's what makes Sukuna very interesting, is because he never outright says these things. It's just something that you can observe through him. No character really likes Sukuna. Everyone despises him, because except for his servant, the cook. I don't remember her name right now. The one that can use ice. That's the only real exception, the only real, I would say, friend he ever really has. Everyone else is either afraid of him or trying to use him in some way, like Kenjaku, for instance, or even Yuji to an extent. Even the sorcerer he's incarnated into, Yuji, hates him. But we know that Sukuna, he just wants to have this interesting life. But I think that's what makes him such a compelling antagonist, is because he isn't trying to be evil. He isn't trying to be an antagonist. He isn't trying to destroy the world or have some kind of crazy ideal, like, say, in Bleach, you have Yuha, who's trying to, like, remove life and death. Or you have, let's say, Pain, who's trying to, like, you know, perpetuate the cycle of hatred. Or you have, like, Sasuke as well, trying to destroy, like, the Leaf Village, etc. You have these, like, kind of... You look at them, you're like, yeah, you could see how, like, a lot of people would be like, yeah, that's pretty evil, my guy. But, you know, to Sasuke, that's not very evil. I haven't really read too much Naruto, so I'm probably butchering that analysis. But the point, I think that it gets the point across. Sukuna isn't trying to be these things. It's just a consequence of his actions. He's just like that. He's really like that. He just does these things to entertain himself, and by virtue of doing them, by virtue of fighting Jogo, he might help some people and he might kill some other people. He fought Maharaga just to be entertained, even holding back against Maharaga just so he would be entertained. You can see it, he's smiling throughout that fight, and he's interested in how Maharaga fights, breaking down Maharaga, and finding similarities between past people he's fought, literally just waiting to see what Maharaga can do before he continues fighting him. He kind of lives for his pleasure and displeasure, and that's all he really wants. And by virtue of living that way, he simultaneously becomes this uncontrollable threat, even to someone like Kenjaku, because Sukuna doesn't have this predictability to him. He doesn't have any of these sort of ideals like, say, Gojo has, or anyone else has. So this is why a lot of people are afraid of him, is because he will just do things that no other character would, simply because he wants to, not because he has to. Like, say, Yuji has to kill this curse for the sake of his ideals. Sukuna will do it just because he wants to, or he won't do it because he doesn't want to. And that's what I think makes him a very interesting character, and not as one-dimensional as people really make him out to be. But that'll conclude this video. If you enjoyed this video, let me know in the comments. and let me know what you think of Ryoma and Sukuna. As I said at the beginning of this video, the link to this Reddit post will be in the description if you want to read it yourself. And I hope you have a wonderful day.